And welcome to this video for VCE Media students in giving you some tips for writing an extended response in VCE Media. While the basis of this video is to help those doing Unit 1, Outcome 1, the representations extended response, this is something that you can refer back to because a lot of the tips in this are going to be relevant regardless of what media assignment you're working on. These are some very good tips on how we are expected to write and communicate in media compared to other subjects. So let's dive in. So the representation task is an extended response question that will ask you to talk about the representations of teenagers. So you'll need to focus on teen characters in the various media texts that we've looked at, their priorities, and the values that are depicted through these characters. You'll also be asked to unpack the construction of these representations through the use of media codes and how these characters might reflect the context of the time that the film or TV series was made. So to give a little bit more specific details about this representations task, you will have access to the prompt prior to sitting the SAC itself. I'm in fact going to show you the nature of the prompt on the very next slide, but you already have access to that. So you can walk in, be fully prepared, have no questions about what is it actually asking, because you can ask those questions before it comes time to sitting and writing. While you are writing, this is an open book assignment, so you can have access to all of the notes that we've taken through this unit, as well as your laptop and the internet connection that it has. The one thing that I'm asking that you do not use, and I'll be in the room to supervise while you're sitting this, is that you're not using a generative AI app like ChatGPT to generate responses for you. Otherwise, you can be doing research, you can be using your notes, but you can't be asking any AI app to generate the response for you. You'll be given paper and your responses need to be handwritten. You will have 2 lessons to write this, and obviously I can't switch your brains off between our 2 writing lessons. I will take up the paper so that it's fair and equitable that we're only writing in the time given, but of course you can be planning and thinking during the period between those lessons and the period leading up to the first lesson as well. While we're working, we'll need to be respectful of the working habits of others, so this task will be conducted under quiet conditions. I'm not saying silent conditions, because you can even ask me some questions. I won't be proofreading responses during the writing time or at any part of this SAC, but you can ask me questions and you can ask peers questions as well. We just need to be mindful that we're not chatting across the room while others need to be writing quietly. And because of the take-home aspect of this task, because it's across 2 lessons, we won't have time allocated for people who have extra time or rest breaks provisions, because it's kind of an open task. However, I am open to discussion and negotiation with anybody who does feel like they have special provisions and need that little bit of extra time for writing. I'm happy to discuss. The idea is that this task is giving you the chance to show me your best work. So if that means we need to give people some extra time, run it into recess or lunch, for example, we can do that. I'm open to negotiation, right? But that's only to those who have special provisions. Otherwise, it's the 2 full lessons for writing time. And you hand up your written SAC at the end of that first lesson, and then I'll give it back to you, and then the submission is at the end of that second lesson. So the prompt itself is no secret. Here it is. You've already been given it in printed form as well. But the question is, analyze how media representations of teenagers have changed over time. In your response, refer to media codes used to construct representations, the values that are reflected in these representations, and the societal context surrounding the production of various media products. So you can see I've sort of underlined and highlighted a few important aspects of this. The first being analyze. So according to VCE, being able to analyze is to pick apart something in detail and then discuss the relationships. So when we're looking at these three different media texts, we're looking at specific examples discussed in detail, but also how they might connect and relate to other things. Now, those other things might be the values that are embedded in these representations, the societal context surrounding them, but they also might be relationships between the different texts themselves. And we'll get to some examples of that too. Obviously, you do need to focus on codes. We need to talk about the values that might be reflected from these characters and the societal context and evidence from that context. All of these things are in that big document that we've been taking our notes when watching our three media texts this term. The other thing that I'll highlight here is that it's representations of teenagers. Obviously, we need to be looking at more than one representation, but if we're talking about all three texts, of course, we're naturally doing that anyway. So how are you getting marked? The rubric is up on the portal, so I encourage you to have a look at that. But the three areas are your ability to compare the representations and ideologies or values across those media texts and production periods, the use of media codes and conventions in the discussion of these representations, understanding the nature and form of representations of within media products. When we say nature and form, we mean what are those representations like? Are characters built or constructed to be likable by the audience? Are they structured and constructed to be challenging to audience ideals, to surprise us? Do we sympathize with them? That's what we mean by the nature and form. Who are these characters that represent these certain values and how are they presented? Your use of media language and the quality of your overall response. Here's a snapshot of the actual rubric itself. The text is very small, so I do encourage you to double check things on the portal, but please do note that those final two categories, use of media language and the quality of the extended response, are not worth as much as the others. So now we get into the tips. And tip number one is to sort of emphasize to you that a media extended response is an extended response, aka a long answer. This does not mean that it's an essay. There are very formal conventions of how you are meant to write an essay. You know this from English. You know that you've got, some of you apply the teal structure in terms of how you actually structure your paragraphs. This is not the case in media. So there's some distinct differences that are important here. The first one being don't waffle. Tell me something once and in detail the first time you tell me. You don't have to warm up to your answer. You just need to give it. So here I've got, this is our English teacher who likes to read lots and lots of thick books, likes you to make your point over and over again to remind them, or first you say what your point's going to be, and then halfway through the essay, you tell them what your point is with some evidence and detail, and then you remind them at the end of what your point was. Media teachers are not English teachers. I don't read that many books. I scroll through social media, and if you don't get to the point fast enough, I'm scrolling past you, right? Capture my attention quickly. Don't waffle. Give me the important information as quickly as possible and in the most amount of detail as possible. Right? So just remember, media is not English. Tip number 2, which is kind of an expansion on this, get to the good stuff. Right, what I'm really looking for, and you've seen that in the rubric or the marking criteria, I want your detailed analysis. I want you to dive in and describe in technical detail the codes and conventions used to construct these values and these representations of teenage life. So to give you some more sort of concrete guidance here, keep your introduction short, 2 to 3 sentences. That's all I need. 3 is the absolute maximum. That's starting to get to overkill. And your conclusion should be almost non-existent. 1 sentence, right? Sum up the fact that teenage representations have changed over time from point A in Are You Popular to point Z in Lady Bird. So really, really quick. You have about 2.5 pages of line allocation given to you, with extra lines available when on request, and in fact there'll be some at the back of the SAC itself. So it's not a lot, right? 2 lessons to write 2.5 pages is not a lot. So what do I need? I need you to be succinct. I need you to be detailed straight away. Okay, condense all of the information from 3 texts and a whole term's worth of work, condense that down to only give me the best stuff. Okay, as I said before, don't waste time signposting and telling me what you're about to say. Just tell me. All right, you don't have to remind me what you said either. Just tell me once, right? I'm smart enough to read it once and know what you mean, okay? If you're smart enough to express it clearly and in detail the first time. So tip number 3 is kind of a good recipe for going through media examples, or when we're analyzing something in the media, particularly the use of codes and or conventions. We need to be applying what I call the TIDE formula. So if each discussion of example, each discussion of a character or a particular representation includes these 4 things, you're going to be excelling in this task and in any task in media. So what's a TIDE formula? So T stands for terminology, right? Make sure that you're describing things with the correct terms and detailed media terms. So if we're talking about, let's say, for example, costuming, what a character wears, we're not saying the character's clothes. We're saying their costuming, and then even more specifically, an aspect of mise en scène. Right? These are some of the technical terms. When we're talking about camera movements, you need to make sure that you're saying something more than just the camera moves, but using the actual technical term for it. Does the camera pan? Does it tilt? Does it track? Does it dolly? Does it zoom? Have that term accurate. Whenever you're describing what's in a shot, use the shot size term, right? Instead of just saying in a shot of Ladybird, say in a close-up shot of Ladybird. So layer that technical terminology all throughout. The I stands for identify. So be really clear about saying what the code is, right? The code of camera, the code of lighting. Be clear who the character is, okay? Don't just say Ladybird's friend. Look up the name and make sure you include that properly, right? Double check these things. Make sure that if you're talking about a value or an ideology, name it clearly. Remember, we've listed these values as that statements, right? That teenagers are obsessed with sex in Dawson's Creek, right? So make sure it's nice and clear. Identify the thing that you're talking about. The D stands for describe, and this is where so many of your marks will come from. Describing specific examples using technical detail and terminology. So I don't want you to be summing up the whole film. You don't have time for it. Just pick one really clear example that shows us a value associated with teenage life at that time. And then finally, explain the effect. So that might be how it makes the audience think or feel. But in our case for this assignment, we're going to be explaining what the example we've just described represents to the audience. What does it actually convey or communicate to the audience, right? Having the slow-mo shot of Jen walking towards Dawson and Pacey communicates to the audience that ... Okay, so if every example that you analyze includes these 4 things, you are well and truly on your way to a great mark in this assignment. Tip number 4, this comes back to a little bit that media is not English, but codes are greater than quotes. You're allowed to use quotes from characters to illustrate a point or to show a particular representation. However, describing the construction of codes using technical media language is much more valuable in this subject, okay? And if you do use quotes, put that, frame that to me as a code, because dialogue is a written code. So make sure you note that, okay? But don't feel like you need to have quotes all throughout like you do in, let's say, humanities or English essays, right? I'd rather you describe the technical filmmaking process instead. Tip number 5, when you are talking about codes, use a variety in your response. Okay? Show me that your media knowledge is not only deep and detailed, but also broad. Okay, don't just rely on the one code all throughout. Show me a mix, right? Codes like acting and mise en scène when talking about characters tend to be easier ones to discuss. So try to work to bring in some of those more challenging or technical ones. So editing, for instance. Tip number 6, this is a great rule for any work in media. Less stuff in more detail is greater than lots of stuff summarized or in general. So what that means is I would rather you talk about a single shot from Are You Popular than try to sum up the whole 10-minute video, right? Now think about that when we get to something like Dawson's Creek, which is a whole episode, or Lady Bird, which is a whole 2-hour movie. If you try to sum up the 2-hour movie, you are only going to be at the surface level or general. So I would rather you hone into a specific scene, a specific shot, a specific pair of codes, for example. So avoid these phrases like so-and-so is always shot from a low angle. 1, that can't be true. It wouldn't be true. And 2, it shows that you just kind of generally know some things. But instead, if you say in this particular shot, the character is shot from a lower angle because in this moment they are presented to be more powerful than the others in the room or more respectable than the others in the room, that's a much better example. Okay, avoid other words like usually. They're usually shown, okay? Get to one specific example. Tip number 7, prove your point with evidence. So if you're claiming that a character is represented in a positive way, a negative way, they're represented as being selfish, self-centered, dangerous, whatever it might be, you need to describe how that's constructed, okay? You can't just say that something is. You have to be, and this is part of the analyze how, you have to be picking the details about how they're presented the way they are. Now, evidence is also important when talking about things outside of the text itself. So when you're talking about values in society, talk about that context. Give me some examples of what was happening in society at the time. And we do have a list of these in our notes. Sometimes it might be a really good tactic to pick a particular thread and follow it all the way through. So if I'm structuring my response to just look at the relationships between teenage boys and girls, maybe I will bring into it my analysis discussion of the average age of marriage, right? And have that for all 3 time periods. Maybe if I'm talking about how teenagers have gone from conforming to being part of the pack to being highly individualized, maybe I'll focus on the US high school graduation rates and how it shows that more students are interested in learning and getting degrees and forging their own careers. So finding some specific evidence from society. We've got pop cultural references, we've got survey results, there's lots that you have access to. Make sure that every point that you make is supported with evidence. Tip number 8, it kind of goes without saying, but please do write about all 3 media texts that we've looked at. So this shouldn't just be focusing on your favorite. You should have a balanced approach between the 3. So you want to give the impression to me that you are knowledgeable in all 3 of these texts, that you're not just an expert in one, that you weren't just paying attention in one of the lessons, that you really do know all 3 inside out, back to front, and your response is balanced, because we can't really show how things have changed over time unless we're weighing these different time periods up against each other. Tip number 9, find connections between the 3. So this kind of expands on point number 8 here. So, can you find a common thread throughout the 3 texts? As an example, you might look at the costuming of female characters, where we go in Are You Popular? Carolyn here maybe compared to the costuming of Jenny and how she's treated, and how that evolves into Jen, or maybe Miss Jacobs, or maybe a comparison with Joey's construction and what they wear and what that communicates about teenage girls, to Lady Bird, or even Jenna, the cool popular girl in Lady Bird. So that could be a nice way to find connections between all 3 to show that evolution over time, instead of analysing each text completely separate from the others. And finally, tip number 10, think about the structure of your paragraphs, and I say paragraphs because I know that that's how you will like to think. In media, once again, this is an extended response. It's a long response. It's not an essay. You don't necessarily have to paragraph things, but just thinking about maybe the structure of your overall response. Are you going to analyze one text at a time? So are you going to start at the start, go in chronological order? So start with Are You Popular and work your way through Dawson's Creek to Lady Bird? Or are you going to structure your response looking at maybe one value at a time, and then talking about 2 or 3 of the texts sort of together, and how they show that one value, or how that value has changed? Or are you maybe going to structure by looking at the use of one particular code each time? So you might look at, for example, costuming, which is what I just had on the previous slide. And then you can focus just on costuming and how that's changed across the 3. And then you might move on to another code like camera or something like that. So think about that response. I think most of you will probably go for the first structure, where we're showing that evolution by doing each of the texts in chronological order, but it's not the only way to approach this. So you might like to consider these, where you might be looking at the relationships between male and female teens, and how that's changed across all 3, and comparing them as you go. And then you might focus on the relationship between teens and grown-ups, and how that's presented differently. So the option is yours. You don't have to go with kind of the obvious one, which is dot point number 1. So there are your 10 tips. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of help when you are planning your response. In terms of what you can be doing to plan your response, you might like to start off by drawing up a bit of a mind map to see what connections there are. Have a look at your notes, maybe print your notes off so that you can actually compare. Okay, we've looked at camera in both Dawson's Creek and Ladybird, but not in Are You Popular? And having that sort of connection and that mix so you can see the big picture and start to formulate your plan. Maybe if you want kind of to go through that mental exercise where you think about, okay, well, what if I didn't go for the obvious approach of just one text at a time? What if I did try to talk about multiple texts at once? What would that look like? That might help you to have a more interesting approach in your response. And most of all, though, go with the response that you feel the most comfortable with. Go with the response that you think you've got the most to talk about. Don't think about what others are doing around you. Don't look over to the girl next to you as she's planning and think, oh, well, if she's doing those ones, I'm going to do something completely different to play the game. I want to read your best response. The thing that interests you the most is going to interest me the most when I'm reading your analysis of it. And then start writing, start drafting. You do have some time before we actually sit down where you are welcome to think about and draft and double check your notes. You can re-watch some key scenes from all three texts. They are available for you to watch. So make sure that you've got the detail ready to go in our first lesson. Hopefully this video has given you a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help in how to approach this SAC. Good luck with writing it, and I can't wait to read your thoughts on these three films. Thank you.